Greetings and welcome. You're tuned into TMH's Daily English News. The headlines for today: Ethiopian patriarch calls for an end to an ongoing mayhem in the country before it's far too late. UN rights chief calls for the impartial probe into Ethiopia's mass killings. And U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee has passed a bipartisan resolution condemning the starvation as a weapon of war. As we move on to our main updates for today, Ethiopian patriarch calls for an end to an ongoing mayhem within the country before it's far too late. The patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, His Holiness Abuna Matthias, on Thursday issued a statement in which he expressed grief over the horrifying massacre in the Welaga and Gambela regions of Ethiopia. The Ethiopian patriarch lamented that people die simply for their God-given identity. These compatriots were killed for the identity that they received from God, and so they are martyrs. And the patriarch stated this, adding that their murderers are in fact the direct opponents of God. Abuna Matthias said many humans have been violated by other humans. Ethiopia has been slain by other Ethiopians, and that many have been reduced from having families to being alone and have been denied a dignified death and even a burial at that. He added that many have been treated as strangers in their own country. In these times, when we hear many beautiful words, when the voices of wisdom echo, yet the foundations are destroyed while attention is given to the dome. If it were not for the hypocrisy, this would be a time to say, how did we get here, as the patriarch said in his statement, called for an end to the mayhem before it is too late. The UN rights chief calls for an impartial probe into these Ethiopian mass killings. The UN rights chief on Thursday called on the Ethiopian authorities to conduct prompt, impartial, thorough investigations into the weekend attacks in the west of the country that have killed hundreds of people. Michelle Bachelet said in a released statement that I'm horrified by the senseless killings as well as the forced displacement of the local population in the attack on the Toli village. She said her staff had spoken with witnesses on the 18th of June attack in the Oromia region, who she said armed individuals descended on the Toli region and began shooting randomly, leaving hundreds in death on their route. Most of the victims were women and children, and the statement said that adding at least 2,000 other people had in fact been forced to flee their homes as well. The armed individuals also reportedly burned down several houses during the 4-hour assault. And Ethiopia's parliament on Thursday instructed the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, a state-affiliated independent body, to investigate the killings which said were carried out by the Oromo Liberation Army. A terrible and inhumane atrocity has been committed by the OLA on innocent citizens in parts of the Oromia and the neighboring Gambela region. Survivors of the attack told AFP that hundreds of people belonging to the Amhara ethnic group were killed by these armed groups, with bodies still laying on the streets after hours of violence commenced. But a spokesman for the OLA blamed the region's pro-government militia for the killings and called for an independent investigation. Bachelet called on the Ethiopian authorities to ensure that the investigations are promptly launched into the attack and to ensure that the victims and their families have a right to truth, justice, and reparations, including holding these responsible for the account. She also said that an unspecified number of people were reported to have been abducted during the attack and that their whereabouts still remain unknown. And Bachelet called on the authorities to take all necessary and lawful measures to ensure those kidnapped do in fact regain their freedom again. Senate Foreign Relations Committee passes bipartisan resolution condemning starvation as a weapon of war. U.S. Senator Jim Risch, ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as well as joined with other senators such as Jeff Merkley, Todd Young, Cory Booker, John Thune, and Bob Mendez in an applauding unanimous committee passage of their bipartisan Senate resolution condemning the use of starvation hunger as weapon of war. Conflict is a major driver of food insecurity, and the warring factions in Ethiopia, South Sudan, Syria, Yemen continue to engage in the willful destruction of agricultural goods and infrastructure and manipulate markets, as well as impose security and bureaucratic barriers upon humanitarian, culminating the deliberate starvation of their civilians, said Rich in a statement that he released as well. The resolution passed yesterday condemns the deliberate use of hunger as a weapon of war and calls upon the U.S. government and our partners to respond to needs in real time and, in fact, hold perpetrators accountable as well. From Ukraine to Syria to Ethiopia, we are watching with horror as bad actors destroy agriculture, deny humanitarian access, disrupt markets for crucial commodities in a twisted effort to achieve their geopolitical aims through starvation, said Merkley. The senators said it is critical we use every tool at our disposal to ensure food assistance is not being manipulated or used to manipulate against the civilians so that they desperately need it and they're not prevented from acquiring it. As we move on to our next update, Dush Wells reports thousands of Tigrayans are living in a deplorable camp conditions in Samara. Jen Bosco, head field office at UNHCR in Samara, confirmed to DW that the group of displaced persons who were moved from the Abala to Samara were all of the Tigrayan ethnicity. He said 8,000 Tigrayans, 7,000 of them women and children, have been held at the government-run camp meant to accommodate about 1,500 people. Let's take a listen.
People.
Based on national and international standards, that should not be living human conditions.
And at least 70 people, of those including 5 children, have died in the camp due to the lack of medication and food. And current and former IDPs also told DW that they were not allowed to visit the camp, and local authorities reportedly declined interviews with DW as well. According to a former detainee, some people couldn't leave the camp, but could leave by paying barbs of 20,000 Ethiopian birr, also $300, which most IDPs just did not have to expend. The UN says a new camp has recently opened to ease congestion by taking hundreds of people from Samara IDP camp, but even there, people are not free to leave as well. In Abala, the Afar militia targeted and killed over 250 Tigrayans, and Afar forces together with the Afar residents shot Tigrayans, burnt their houses, and they were targeting Tigrayans only. One witness, with wishes to remain anonymous, made these accusations. An African think tank says lasting peace remains elusive in Ethiopia despite the progress towards peace talks. The African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Dispute said the peace talks are finally on the horizon between Ethiopia's federal government and the leaders of the northern Tigray region, but lasting peace in the country remains a distant hope. Accord indicated that the federal government's war efforts was coordinated with leaders in Eritrea and the Amhara region, but these relations are strained, and they're now strained owing to Abiy's back-channel talks with the Tigray leaders. Abiy's willingness to enter into the negotiations with Tigray's leader may reflect a growing weariness with the war, and that his priority is now shifting to tackling the insurgency within the Oromia region. And again, according to Accord, negotiations could begin by the end of June either in Kenya or Tanzania, and it is expected that they will compromise 2 delegations with 5 members from each. Over the last 6 months, fighting in the northern region has been limited to small-scale confrontations, mostly between Tigray's army and the Afar Eritrean forces, and according to Accord, said a member of confidence, building measures have taken place since Abiy Ahmed declared a humanitarian truce on the 24th of March. The Tigray Defense Force withdrew from the Amhara region last December from Afar at the end of April, and then in late May, following weeks of talks between military commanders on both sides, the TDF released over 4,200 prisoners of war. However, the federal government denied that these released were its soldiers and reneged on its own promise to release these prisoners. Thousands of Tigrayan civilians remain in detention till this day, and the Ethiopian government blockade from entering the region for most of the war and leading to famine conditions after the fact. The following aid has gradually increased but is still insufficient. Basic services such as electricity, banking, and communications all still remain shut off completely to all of the population in Tigray. While these recent progresses has generated a sense of optimism, there still remains no timetable for the restoration of essential services in Tigray, and Addis Ababa still believes a military solution is in fact viable in the Oromia region. Accord indicated that the peace process itself remains difficult because of the land dispute between the Amhara and Tigray region and the malign role played by the Eritrea and the intensifying war that continues within the Oromia region. Our final update for today, satellites have been said to be helping fill the gaps where war correspondents fall short within Tigray region. The New York Times reported how research teams are still telling the story of Ethiopian civil war. Throughout the war, accessing accurate information has in fact been difficult, and about the conflict has been the best as a communication blackout has left most of Tigray's region without access to cell service or, in fact, internet. Suddenly, the training in satellite image analysis of John Neeson, who's a professor of geography at Ghent University, alongside Imnet Nagash, who is a doctoral student in the same university, and their other team members, took on a relevance in studying a region cut off from the world. Neeson, Nagash, and the rest of the team turned to Sentinel Hub and Google Earth to study the scale of destruction, as the research teams have done in the crises from Sudan to Myanmar. From aerial imagery, they tracked the visible imprints of war, debris on the road signifying looting, burned buildings signifying marked violence, and all villages across the country. However, the images can only reveal so much. The group is one of the few teams in the world currently dedicated to gathering and publishing remote sensing data about the conflict and its impact on the land and the cities and the people in northern Ethiopia is impactful. The team's work, along with citizens reporting the rare dispatches from the journalists who have gained access to Tigray region, has formed a patchwork sense of what is happening and what that is incomplete. Nagash said, "All we have is satellites. What we really need is reporting live on the ground." Still, Nagash is more afraid of what he doesn't know than what he has learned so far. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a wonderful weekend.